didn't take my mask off, I'd probably pass out before I finished here. So I'll stay away from y'all, but here we go. First off, let me say, I can't describe the feeling I had when you all were driving up today. Really. I missed you. Every one of you. Some of them I hadn't even met before until today, but I still missed you. This group over here, I've known these guys since they were pipers. Now they're up in molds. Some of them back here, I've known since they were born, since they were babies. But I missed you. And it was just so neat standing out there with your Sarah today, seeing you drive up, being able to talk with you out of the car, and see your parents. Just an incredibly indescribable, neat feeling. Now, having said that, let me tell you a little story about myself. Part of it's even true. You probably don't see me as a shy guy. Maybe you do, I don't know. But I grew up on a dairy farm in a rural area, a very small town. Wasn't around many people when I was a kid. There were 24 of us in my high school graduating class. I mean, we've got 3 times that in here. That's how small my school was. And we knew everybody, but we never thought about it. Okay, I graduated from high school and went up to the college. Big city. Thousands of kids in college. And I was out of my element. Totally out. I was so shy. I didn't want to get out of the dorm room. I didn't want to go to class. I did. I passed barely. And then I kept going back, ended up with a doctorate fellow. But that was history. It didn't start out smooth at all. Not at all. And had my best friend Warren from high school went to college with me. And he kept trying to get me to go out on dates. I had no interest in going on a date. None at all. I was too shy. I didn't want to face a girl face to face. I couldn't do it. And he said, well, I'm going to set you up with a blind date with my cousin, Doris. I didn't Doris. I didn't know anybody named Doris. I didn't want to know anybody named Doris. But he convinced me to go on a date. It's simple. If you knock on the door and she's pretty and you like her, everything's fine. If you knock on the door and she's ugly and you don't like her, do what I do. What do you do? Well, Lauren, my best buddy, kind of gave me some bad advice. He said, well, what I do is I look at her and she's ugly. And he said, I feel like I have asthma and I can't breathe. Go and cut off the date. Okay, I'll try. Well, you know what happened? Knocked on the door, she opened up, but she was beautiful. She was beautiful. She didn't want to look at me, but So that was my introduction to dating in college. Didn't go very well. I don't remember who I asked. I think Lake. Who did I ask to do 1 Samuel, verse 16, 17? Lake, can you read that for loud, real loud?
The Lord does not look at things people look at. People look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart.
And I asked somebody to read 1 Peter chapter 3, verses 3 and 4. Who was that? Hannah? Loud. Use your big girl voice.
Your beauty should not come from outward adornment, such as elaborate hairstyles and the grand gold jewelry and fine clothes. Rather, it should be that of your inner self, elevated in a gentle and quiet spirit, which is great wisdom.
How many of you heard her? I want y'all to hear that. I want it real loud. Once more. Please, Hannah. Real loud.
Your beauty should not come from outward adornment, such as elaborate hairstyles and the wearing gold jewelry or fine clothes. Rather, it should be that
comes from the inside. Now, the first reference was from Samuel, and Samuel was a guy who anointed the future king of Israel named David. How many of you heard of David? The story goes, when Samuel was told by God to go, he was kind of put out with Saul, the current king. To go to Jesse's house, David's father. Go to his house, and I'll tell you which one of his sons I want you to anoint to become the next king of Israel. So Samuel went, and Jesse had 7 sons. And the first few were really strong, virile, good-looking. Wouldn't you hear from David? He would never have chosen them. Ever. He would say, man, these guys are hunks. And God kept telling Samuel, I don't look at the outward appearance like others do. I look at what's in their heart. It's what's inside that makes you who you are. Not what you look like, not what hairstyle you wear, not what jewelry you wear, none of that. Long story short, David was in the field tending sheep as a kid. So they brought him in, a pretty guy. He was ruddy complected, they said. He probably not very pretty. But that's the one God chose. The rest is history. David was probably more known than any other king of the Jews. The Jewish religion, the Jewish faith today still look at David as the founder of the Jewish religion. He's the one God chose, not what we look like, but what's in here. Now, I'll tell you that story to tell you this. I'm trying to connect these two together, maybe rough. I know a lot of Bible stories. I bet you know a lot of Bible stories. I bet you've heard a lot of Bible stories. I bet every one of you have heard a lot of Bible stories. Noah, Samson, Moses, you name them. I bet you all have heard some of those stories. Well, back in January, our pastor at our church made a statement that really slapped me upside the face. He said, and I'm paraphrasing, he says, you know, we all know Bible stories, but what we do is we read them, we listen to them, and we put them aside and remember the story. But we don't live story. We need to look into what the story is telling us and join the journey that story is leading us on. So there's a journey of stories. Well, especially in Footsteps this week, you're going to hear a lot of stories about a man named Paul. He was called the Apostle Paul. He wasn't one of the original disciples, but he's been classified as one of them because of his work. What do you know about the Apostle Paul? You haven't really studied him yet. Do you know that he wrote most of the New Testament? Almost all of the New Testament he wrote. You probably know the story that he was born Saul, a Jew. He was a very powerful Jew. He hated the Christians and he killed them. He didn't like them. He was trying to wipe out the Christians. Now, on the way to Damascus one day, God struck him down blind. He says, Saul, why are you persecuting me? And Saul had no answer to that. Just puzzled. He was just totally confused. And again, long story short, Paul was converted. After that, Saul became Paul. Wrote all these stories. You're going to hear a lot of stories this week. One of the stories, one of the things he wrote that you're not studying, but Footsteps kind of got involved with it today. He wrote a couple of letters to the church of Corinth. We know them as 1 Corinthians and 2 Corinthians in the New Testament. The church of Corinth was behaving a whole lot like we behave today. They were dysfunction. Excuse me, I get nervous up here, so I got to blow my nose, sorry. I'll turn my back so I don't embarrass you, okay? But, thank you. They were dysfunctional. They were bickering with each other. They were fussing with each other. They were at each other's throat. One was saying, you know what, you don't belong in this church. You need to go somewhere else. You're not part of our church. You're not behaving like part of our church. Well, Paul had established that church earlier, so he had kind of a special feeling for that church. So he wrote him a pretty strong letter. He says, you guys are really messing it up. You are so far off base. He says, you know, let me compare you to a body, a human body. He says, you know, there are many parts of a human body. There's the hand, the feet, there's the legs, the mind, the head, the ears, the eyes. He says, not one of those parts can say, the eye can't say, hand, because you're not an eye, I don't need you. I don't need you at all. Or you can't say foot, because I'm a hand, I don't need you. Without any of those, we wouldn't be complete. We need everybody. This would not be camp without every one of you. If one of you was missing, we would be incomplete. And we couldn't do the things, the song you sing, the excitement you have, the energy you show. Wouldn't we? I told Sarah, I tear up every time I hear you guys sing. Yes. But it's because we do it all together. We work together. And Paul was saying to these Corinthians, Church of Corinth, he says, you guys got it all wrong. You do this wrong, you do that wrong, you do this. And then he finishes it in chapter 12. And late in the first verse, the first book of Corinthians, there's only, I think, 16 chapters. And at the very end of chapter 12, after he finishes breaking them over the coals, he said, now, let me show you a better way. Do you know what chapter 13 is called? You guys do know. What chapter 13 is called? Come on, put your tongue spot. The love chapter, thank you. It's called the love chapter.
The love chapter?
The love chapter. He says, you know, all these things you're doing is all messed up. Now, let me show you a better way, is what he ends chapter 12. And who did I ask? McKinley to read the first 3 verses of chapter 13. Real loud, McKinley.
If I speak in the tongues of men or of angels, but do not have love, I am only a resounding gong, or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy, and can fathom all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have a faith that can move mountains, but do not have love, I am nothing. If I give all I possess to the poor, and give over my body to hardship, that I may boast, but do not have love, I gain nothing.
Okay. Rogers, this year's up here. Who brought the symbol?
No, it's not mine.
May I use it for just a moment?
That's for you.
Oh, thank you.
I just forgot to tell you that it was for
Yeah, I saw it was here and I didn't know, so I almost didn't put it in.
you. There's a sticker here too.
Okay. You ever heard of sounding phone? You ever heard of clanging cymbals? This is one symbol, but okay, if I'm going to talk, you actually talk Get the point? If you don't talk with love, you're just a lot of noise. A lot of noise that nobody wants to listen to. It's not very pleasant to hear. That's what Paul said. You don't speak of love. Now, this past year has been, for some of us, a pretty good challenge. Some of you guys haven't had full in-school year at all. Some of you had virtual learning. Some of you all year. Some of you had in-class part of the year, virtual part of the year. Some of you had half and half all year long. Some of you didn't get to see your friends. I don't know about you, but we didn't get to go to a restaurant. My wife and I didn't get to go to a restaurant for probably 12 months, 13 months. It was kind of a treat when we were able to go to a restaurant. It was kind of a downer year. We didn't get to have camp last year. That's why it's been 2 years since I've seen all of this. We didn't get to have camp. You gotta have love. Or you just a lot of noise. You know what happened in this past year? People started getting angry. We're acting a whole lot like the church in Corinth was acting when Paul wrote that first letter. People are getting angry. They're getting discouraged. They're turning on each other. They're arguing with each other. They're backbiting. They're fussy. The Republicans don't like the Democrats. Don't want them around. The Democrats don't want the Republicans around because they're not part of their group. The Protestants don't like the Jewish community. The Jewish community doesn't like the Protestants. The Methodists don't like each other. We're fussing among ourselves and what we're going to do in the future. People said, we don't need the police, defund the police. And people are killing each other in the streets. And we're saying, let's do away with the police. Is that love? We need to live the story Paul writes about. We can't just read those words and forget about it. And say, oh, that's a pretty poem. That's the love chapter. I use that chapter, those of you who know me, I use that chapter as a crutch. I use it as an excuse. Right, brother?
Uh-huh.
Thank you, brother. He goes on to say, now I don't see things very clearly. Well, I don't see things very clearly now. It's not because I had cataracts. I had those removed. I can see you pretty clearly, but I don't see things as clearly. I don't understand things that are happening. I don't understand why these things are happening. But Paul goes on to say, in the future, I will see and know as well as God knows me. When's that going to happen? Tomorrow? Might be. For me. Might be for one of you. But Paul thought about it. After I die and I'm with God, then I will understand. Don't have to understand here. But I do need to speak with love. We could say, well, I'm angry about what happened this year, and I'm not going to come to camp. Or I'm not going to wear the mask because I have to wear a mask while I'm at camp. Or I don't like having to register you differently. Or I don't like the way we have to eat in separate groups, or that we have to sit in separate groups. I don't like any of that stuff. And I can grouse about that all day long. Is that love? No, it's not. A better way, Paul would say, would be grateful for what we have. It's a blessing for us to be able to be here in this room. A year ago, we couldn't do this. It's a blessing we have masks that we can wear so that we can be with each other. It's a blessing that the scientists have worked really hard to create a vaccine that some of us can take, some of us can choose not to. It's a blessing that we have that choice. Not all would agree with one side or the other, but it's a blessing that we have that choice. And it doesn't do us any good to say, I'm not going to take the vaccine because I think it's stupid, or it doesn't do any good for me to say, well, I took the vaccine, so why don't you take it because you're being stupid? No, that doesn't work. That's not love. We're all in this together. We all make up the body of Christ. Every one of you, including me, make up the body of Christ. So, what do we do? What can we do? Remember, when we hear a story this week, or we study the Bible this week, don't just read it as a neat story. Look at what it's telling us. You know, that Bible's been around for 2,000 years, over 2,000 years. Well, not the Bible, but some of the writings, right at 2,000 years. It was canonized at less than 2,000. But anyway, the Bible's been around 2,000 years. It is just as accurate today as it was 2,000 years ago. It is just as appropriate to us to learn what it's saying today as it was 2,000 years ago. Every word in the Bible is exactly meant for us. It's God's word for us. The Bible, in the New Testament, there's a verse, and I just have to throw that in. God is what? What's the word? Four-letter word. Hard to nail on the back of your shirts. God is love. There's another one that says they'll know we're Christians by our love. What do we sing first? I got that. Love, 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 love. You know? Yeah. So love. Now, there's all kinds of love. That doesn't mean you have to grab hold of each other and start kissing and smooching and whatever. That's not the kind of love it's talking about. It's the kind of love that means acceptance. It's the kind of love that says, I don't care what you look like. I don't care what color your skin is. I don't care what length your hair is. I don't care what color your shirt you're wearing. What I care about is you. What's inside. That's what I want to look at when I look at you. That's what I would ask you to look at when you look at each other.